Cliff Richard disappeared from the spotlight. Now we know why. For many, many years, Sir Cliff Richard was a huge star in British music. He was called the Peter Pan of pop because he stayed popular for so long. He sold over 250 million records around the world and had a career that lasted more than 60 years. His place in music history seemed like it would last forever. Then, suddenly, one of music's biggest stars seemed to disappear. It wasn't a slow fade away. It was like someone turned off a light switch, said a person who used to work at the BBC and had worked with Richard on many TV shows. One of the most famous voices in British music history suddenly went quiet. No new albums, no tours, no TV appearances. For someone who had been everywhere in entertainment since the late 1950s, the silence was shocking. This wasn't just a short break or a well-earned retirement. It happened at the same time as some terrible events that made people wonder if Cliff Richard, the forever young performer who had survived every kind of music from rock and roll to disco to electronic pop, might never come back to public life again. Today, we're looking at the shocking truth behind Sir Cliff Richard's mysterious disappearance from the spotlight. A story of betrayal, legal battles, and personal pain that drove one of music's biggest stars into hiding. The real story involves not just personal struggles, but a system that failed him and nearly destroyed both his legendary career and his health. But first, let's look at the amazing position Cliff Richard had in music history before his sudden disappearance and why his absence left such an obvious hole in the entertainment world. Sail away. The amazing legacy that made his disappearance so shocking. To understand how big of a deal Cliff Richard's sudden disappearance was, you need to know what an important position he held in music history. His career started in 1958 with his hit song Move It, which many people say was Britain's first real rock and roll record. He had done something no other artist in British chart history could match. He had hit records in 6 decades in a row. Cliff wasn't just another old pop star, explained a music historian who has studied British pop culture since the 1960s. He was like a living monument, the only performer who had successfully made it through every musical era from before the Beatles to the digital age. Even when his music wasn't trendy, everyone still knew who he was and respected him. The numbers from his career are hard to believe. Over 130 singles, albums, and EPs reached the UK top 20, making him the third top-selling artist in UK singles chart history behind only Elvis Presley and the Beatles. For generations of British music fans, Cliff Richard wasn't just a singer. He was always there, as familiar and reliable as the Queen herself. What made Cliff unique wasn't just how much he sold, but how he was everywhere in British culture, said a longtime worker at EMI Records. Christmas TV specials, royal performances, even entertainment during rain delays at Wimbledon tennis matches. Cliff was woven into British cultural life beyond just his music. His sudden absence left a hole in many different parts of entertainment all at once. This being everywhere made his disappearance even more noticeable. The artist who had released at least one album almost every year since 1959 suddenly stopped making new music. His usual TV appearances stopped. His regular touring schedule, which had continued without stopping even into his 70s, came to a sudden halt. What could possibly drive such a strong, consistent performer away from the public that had supported him for over 6 decades? The answer starts with a police raid that would destroy his sense of safety and create a media nightmare worse than anything he had experienced in his long career. Crews that greeted him today. But he came to the High Court along with his friend Gloria Hunterford to describe the public humiliation he felt when the BBC broadcast a police raid on the raid that changed everything. On August 14, 2014, Cliff Richard's world fell apart in a way that would have been impossible to imagine for this clean-living, deeply religious performer. While he was on vacation at his home in Portugal, he got news that his house in Berkshire was being raided by South Yorkshire police. This was about an accusation of sexual assault from way back in 1985. What made this raid so unusual and ultimately devastating for Cliff wasn't just that it happened, but how it happened, explained a former police detective who knew about the case. The BBC had been told about it ahead of time. They had a helicopter flying over Richard's home, showing the raid live on TV while police searched his house. This was unprecedented media coverage for an investigation at this early stage. This unusual break from normal police procedure turned what should have been a private investigation into a worldwide media circus. Before Richard had even been talked to by police, let alone charged with any crime, his home was being shown on live television with reporters guessing about the accusations in real time. Imagine finding out that your home is being raided not from the police, but from friends calling to tell you they're watching it happen live on TV, said a longtime friend of the singer. Cliff said it felt like he was being treated as guilty before any real investigation had even started. The idea that you're innocent until proven guilty, which is supposed to be the foundation of justice, was destroyed in an instant. The immediate impact on Richard was serious. According to people close to him, his body reacted with shock, including uncontrollable shaking, trouble sleeping, and he lost weight very quickly. The performer, who had stayed remarkably healthy and energetic into his 70s, suddenly looked weak and small. It wasn't just the accusation itself, which he knew was false and would eventually be proven wrong, revealed someone on his management team. It was how public it was, the feeling that institutions he had trusted had betrayed him, and the immediate judgment by the media before he'd even had a chance to defend himself. For someone like Cliff, who cared deeply about personal honor, it was completely devastating. This devastating public spectacle marked the beginning of a terrible time that would keep him away from performing and recording for nearly 4 years, a period during which his physical and mental health would be seriously tested by a system that seemed to have given up on treating him fairly, something he had trusted throughout his life. Well, you know, I always eat the right food. I try to eat the right food for me, and, today I went into the gym for 45 minutes a little bit, not to lose weight. I don't want to lose weight. I'm already slim, the health crisis the public never saw. While the public saw Cliff Richard disappear from the entertainment world, what stayed hidden was the serious health crisis caused by the investigation and media coverage. A physical and mental breakdown that people closest to him feared might kill the then 73-year-old performer. What people don't realize is that Cliff almost died during this time, said a longtime member of his inner circle who saw his decline firsthand. His body literally started shutting down from the stress. He lost over 28 pounds in just a few weeks. He got shingles, which can be life-threatening for someone in their 70s. His doctors were genuinely worried that the stress could cause a heart attack or stroke. The mental impact was just as bad. According to friends, Richard showed signs consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, including intrusive thoughts, trouble sleeping, and moments when he didn't know where he was. The performer, known for his constant positivity and religious faith, found himself in a dark place that went against everything about his public image. He would wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning in cold sweats, said a close friend who spent time with him during this period. Sometimes he couldn't remember where he was. This was a man who had performed perfectly on stages around the world for decades, who never forgot a song lyric or missed a cue, suddenly struggling with basic daily tasks. It was heartbreaking to watch. The investigation went on for almost 2 years without any charges being filed, making the period of uncertainty longer and preventing Richard from fully recovering his health. Even normal activities became hard as he faced the possibility of being recognized in public and potentially harassed. He basically became a prisoner, first in his Portugal home, then later moving between safe locations, explained a security consultant who helped him during this period. Every public appearance carried the risk of someone shouting accusations or photographers taking unflattering pictures that could feed into the negative story. For someone who had always had a warm, open relationship with the public, this forced isolation was especially cruel. Medical professionals treating Richard during this time reportedly became so worried about his getting worse condition that they told his management team to prepare for the worst. The combination of old age, severe stress, and physical symptoms created a potentially life-threatening situation that the public stayed mostly unaware of as the legal process slowly moved forward. What's remarkable isn't that Cliff disappeared from public life during this terrible time, said a doctor with expertise in stress-related illness, though not directly involved in Richard's care. What's remarkable is that he survived it at all. The physical impact of this kind of stress on a person in their 70s can be catastrophic. Many people in similar situations don't recover. This hidden health crisis explains not just Richard's absence from the entertainment world, but also the deep change in how he approached public life, even after the investigation ended. A change from one of Britain's most accessible stars to someone understandably careful about the systems and institutions that had failed to protect his basic rights. In a way, I still feel tarnished, because insufficient suggests that maybe there's the financial devastation few people understand. Beyond the serious health impact, Cliff Richard's terrible experience created a financial disaster that few people fully understand. Costs so huge that they threatened the security of even a performer with his legendary success. The combination of legal expenses, canceled opportunities, and career damage created losses estimated to be more than £10 million. The public assumes that someone with Cliff's track record must have unlimited money, explained an entertainment industry financial advisor familiar with cases like this. But the reality is that defending yourself against accusations at this level, especially when the entire police and media system is involved, creates huge costs that would strain even the most successful artists' finances. Richard's legal representation alone during the 2-year investigation reportedly cost over $3 million. This included not just defense against the allegations, but also legal actions at the same time against both the BBC and South Yorkshire Police for how they handled the raid and investigation. Complex lawsuits involving multiple specialized attorneys. Beyond these direct legal costs, the career impact created even more financial damage. Richard was forced to cancel a planned album release and promotional tour, delay a major autobiography, and withdraw from many high-profile television appearances and concert commitments. The money lost from these cancelled projects has been estimated at between £4 to £5 million. There were also significant costs that can't be precisely calculated, noted a music industry executive who has worked with multiple artists facing public relations crises. The damage to his streaming numbers, the decline in sales of his old music catalog during the investigation, the cancelled endorsements and appearance fees. These represent millions in lost income that are harder to calculate precisely, but no less real. Perhaps most significantly, Richard's real estate holdings, which represented a large portion of his net worth, were badly impacted by the events. His Berkshire apartment, which had been the subject of the televised raid, proved basically impossible to sell because of its association with the case. Richard was eventually forced to sell the property at a big loss, reportedly accepting over $800,000 below what it was worth before the raid. The financial impact goes beyond just the immediate costs, explained a wealth manager who specializes in advising entertainment figures. Cliff was in his 70s, a time when most people are focused on financial security and planning what they'll leave behind. Instead, he was forced to sell investments, sell properties, and redirect money to legal battles rather than future security. That creates long-term consequences beyond the immediate expenses. These financial pressures help explain why, even after being fully cleared, Richard didn't immediately return to his previous level of public activity. The combination of health challenges and financial recovery needs required a more careful, strategic approach to rebuilding his career and securing his future after a terrible experience that had threatened everything he had built over 6 decades in entertainment. The BBC to acknowledge that what it had done to him was unlawful. Before litigation commenced, we asked the BBC to accept this and to apologize. The legal victory that came too late. After nearly 2 years of investigation, in June 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that Cliff Richard would face no charges because there wasn't enough evidence. While this legal clearing should have been a triumphant end to his ordeal, the reality was far more complicated and bittersweet. The problem with these kinds of accusations is that no matter how thoroughly they're proven false, some damage can never be undone, explained a reputation management specialist who works with public figures facing similar situations. Cliff had to live with the reality that for many people, the raid and accusations would be the first thing they thought of when they heard his name, regardless of him being cleared. This painful truth led Richard to take the unusual step of suing both the BBC and South Yorkshire Police for how they handled the case. A legal battle that would continue for another 2 years after he had been cleared of any wrongdoing. In July 2018, he finally won his privacy case against the BBC, with the judge ruling that the broadcaster had violated his privacy rights in a serious and sensationalist way. The court victory was vindicating but exhausting, said a person close to the legal proceedings. Cliff had to relive the entire traumatic experience through depositions, testimony, and cross-examination. Even winning carried an emotional cost that made the recovery period longer and further delayed his return to normal work activities. The financial compensation, while substantial at $2 million including legal costs, represented only a fraction of his actual losses from the 4-year ordeal. More importantly, it couldn't give back the years of his career that had been permanently lost during a period when, already in his 70s, time was especially precious. What people often miss about this case is that Cliff was in the later stages of his career when this happened, said a music critic who has followed his work for decades. For a performer in their 30s or 40s, losing 4 years is significant, but recoverable. For someone in their 70s, it represents a big portion of their remaining good-performing years. That's time and opportunity that can never be gotten back, regardless of legal victories. The long timeline of both the investigation and the legal action that followed explains why Richard's absence from public life lasted so long. By the time all legal matters were fully resolved in 2018, nearly 4 years had passed since the original raid. Years during which he had mostly disappeared from recording studios, concert venues, and television screens where he had been a constant presence for the previous 6 decades. This long absence, combined with the ongoing stress of legal proceedings even after being cleared, created a deep shift in Richard's relationship with both his career and public life, a change that would become obvious as he cautiously began to come back into the spotlight. Lee and Ricky Nelson and Buddy Holly, Gene Vincent. I mean, wonderful, wonderful people that we aren't. Yes, and they're the influences that created us. The comeback on his own terms. When Cliff Richard finally returned to public life after his legal victories, fans and industry observers noticed small but important changes in how the legendary performer approached his career and relationship with the public. Changes that directly showed the trauma he had experienced and the lessons he had learned from his ordeal. The Cliff who returned wasn't the same Cliff who disappeared, noted a concert promoter who worked with him on post-investigation performances. He was more selective, more protective of his privacy, and more careful about where and how he engaged with the public. This wasn't just a return to business as usual. It was the emergence of a more cautious, controlled approach to his public life. This change showed up in several concrete ways. Richard significantly reduced his touring schedule, choosing fewer but more meaningful venues rather than the extensive tours that had characterized his previous decades. His media appearances became more carefully planned with greater control over the context in which he would be presented and discussed. There was a fundamental shift in priorities, explained a longtime associate. Before the investigation, Cliff approached his career with remarkable openness and accessibility. Afterward, his well-being and peace of mind took priority over commercial considerations or public expectations. He began making decisions based on what felt right and safe, rather than what might be most profitable or promotional. Perhaps most notably, Richard became an outspoken advocate for legal reform surrounding privacy rights and how investigations are handled. His 2018 autobiography, The Dreamer, devoted significant attention to his ordeal and what it meant for justice and media responsibility more broadly. What had been a private trauma became the foundation for public advocacy that added a new dimension to his legacy. What's remarkable about Cliff's comeback is that he refused to simply move on or pretend the ordeal hadn't happened, said a media analyst who has studied celebrity privacy cases. He made it part of his public identity, using his platform to highlight systemic problems that had affected him, but also impact many less privileged people who don't have his resources or visibility to fight back. This evolution helps explain why Richard's presence in public life has remained more limited than his pre-investigation activity level. What some observers mistakenly thought was a diminished career or semi-retirement actually represents a deliberate adjustment, a conscious choice to engage with the entertainment world on terms that protect his hard-won recovery and reflect his changed priorities after a life-altering experience. The question was never whether Cliff could return to his previous level of activity, said a member of his management team. The question was whether he would want to after experiencing such a profound betrayal by systems and institutions he had trusted. His more measured comeback represents a thoughtful response to that question, a balance between reconnecting with his audience and protecting the recovery he fought so hard to achieve, innocent of what was alleged. But it took 2 years until the investigation concluded with no charge. I don't think people realize what it's like to have the legacy protection that became his mission. As Cliff Richard gradually came back into public life, people close to him identified a new priority that had fundamentally changed his approach to his career: the protection and preservation of his musical and cultural legacy. After seeing how quickly 6 decades of achievement could be overshadowed by false accusations, the ordeal created a big question for Cliff, said a longtime friend involved in his business affairs. If 60 years of positive contribution could be so quickly overshadowed by false accusations, what would his ultimate legacy be? This concern became a driving force in how he approached the final chapters of his career. This shift showed up in several concrete initiatives. Richard became more actively involved in archival projects preserving his musical catalog, including remastering classic recordings and putting together retrospective collections that highlighted his artistic evolution across 7 decades. These projects gained a new urgency after he witnessed how easily public perception could be redirected by forces beyond his control. There was a recognition that he needed to take a more active role in shaping how his career would be remembered, explained a music historian who worked on one such project. Cliff had always been somewhat modest about his contributions to pop music history, but the investigation made him aware that if he didn't tell his own story, others would define his legacy for him. This concern extended beyond just his musical achievements to his broader cultural impact and charity work. Richard increased his involvement with charitable causes that had long been important to him, including the Cliff Richard Tennis Foundation and various Christian organizations, making sure these aspects of his life received appropriate attention alongside his entertainment career. What became clear was that Cliff was thinking about how he'd be remembered in a way he hadn't before, noted a biographer who has documented his career. Before the investigation, he was so busy living his career that he hadn't focused much on how it would ultimately be remembered historically. After coming so close to seeing his entire life's work reduced to tabloid headlines, preserving his legacy became a primary focus. This legacy concern helps explain why, even after his legal vindication, Richard has been selective about new musical projects and public appearances. Rather than simply returning to previous patterns of activity, he has prioritized quality over quantity, focusing on performances and recordings that reinforce the aspects of his career he most wants to preserve for future generations. Every appearance, every interview, every new recording is now viewed through the lens of, how does this contribute to the complete picture of my life's work? Explained an associate involved in his current projects. That's a fundamentally different approach than the constant activity that characterized most of his career. But it reflects hard-earned wisdom about how quickly public perception can change if you don't actively manage your own story. This evolution provides the final piece of understanding about why Cliff Richard seemed to vanish and why his return has been measured and strategic rather than immediate and comprehensive. His disappearance wasn't just about recovery from trauma or legal battles. It reflected a profound reassessment of his relationship with fame and a determination to ensure that his complete legacy would ultimately transcend the darkest chapter of his public life.